you so much for being with us again. I have my brother Nate Pickowickz here with us. How you doing, Nate?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing better than I deserve. So today we want to talk to Nate about R.C. Sproul's, I'm sorry, I threw a little bit of accent there. R.C. Sproul biography. Although this book says that it only focuses on the public ministry of R.C. Sproul. Brother, how long did it take you to write this book?
I think from the time that I was contracted to do it to the time I finished it, I think it was about 1.5 years. So for a biography, that's pretty fast, actually. I worked pretty quickly to get this done, but I'd say probably all in, I spent a solid year researching and writing and reading all of his materials. So yeah, it was a blast.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, I was reading the book, and the first thing that came to mind is that a lot of people expect this kind of books to have a lot of, like, if I may say, like, in this way, a lot of dirt on the person, or a lot of the you know, the stuff that was going around their personal life. And I really like the fact that this book starts by saying, like, this is not going to focus on that. This is going to focus on his public ministry and how that impacted the Reform community, the Christian community. So what led you to just take it to that, on that terrain?
Yeah. So the question's actually come up quite a few times already. You know, why don't I talk about, you know, all the stuff on the side, and, you know, even his sins and his flaws, and, you know, family dynamics and all that stuff. And, you know, I think on one level, you know, I'm just not privy to all that information, because all of his family, I mean, his wife, Vesta, I mean, she's still with us. His children are here. His grandkids are all here. He's got a vibrant ministry still going. I was at the Ligonier conference last week, and someone said RC's preaching more now that he's passed on to glory than he was when he was here, because of the ministry just going. So, you know, when you have his family and his ministry still active and still going, my question to the person who asked me that would be, well, what sins would you like me to talk about? Like, you tell me what kind of dirt you're looking for, because if the family is not prepared to talk about things, I'm not certainly going to talk about it. And frankly, when someone passes on, when our loved ones die and go be with the Lord, you know, we don't generally remember them in all their sins, because the Lord doesn't remember our sins when we've confessed them. So, you know, a lot of times I think when you do that kind of biography, you're looking at 50 or 100 years out before you really get an honest biography that explores all the elements of a person's life. But like you said, that just wasn't what I was interested in doing. And I wanted to write a book that was respectful to his family and to his ministry. Certainly, I don't make him out to be perfect. I mean, he did have his problems. He did have issues, and there was drama in his life, and he had friendships that ended, and, you know, there's even challenges with his own family. But that's every family. That's every person. I mean, no pastor is perfect. No ministry is perfect. But I really wanted to focus on, okay, what were the key contributions and the key doctrinal battles that RC fought, and what can we glean from his public ministry? And so that was really that was the purpose of it. And I hope I accomplished that. But, you know, I'm just not going to be the guy that dishes all the dirt on our friends and our heroes.
Yeah, and you know what? And I appreciated that a lot, because a lot of the times we like to know, like, those things, because a lot of times it could come from a gossip spirit. Not all biographies do this. I'm just saying that a lot of the times, like, this could be true. And I mean, although it makes you closer to the person, like, thinking like, well, this is also a human being that had flaws. But we know this. Like, we didn't deify R.C. Sproul. And one of the things that I loved is that the very introduction of this book talks about how we give honor to whom honor is due, rather than deifying or putting them on a pedestal or putting them in a high chair. We're saying, like, no, this is a teacher that God gave us. Just how when God is judging a nation or judging a church, allows bad teachers or bad authorities over us, he also gives good teachers and good authority over us, because he loves us. And then we can see that with through R.C. Sproul's life. Now, I wanted to get that out of the way because a lot of people are asking that question. Like, is there any dirt? Is there? And I think like a lot of the times when a biography comes out, like that's the first thing that that they do this. Like, for example, when we talk about Jonathan Edwards, I've heard a few people saying like, oh, but he used to kind of like steal a little bit of money. I'm like, there's like no biography that says this. This is like a bunch of like made up stuff. So the reason why I'm saying this is because we are attracted to those kinds of things, and whether we like it or not, like those things are out there. So I really love that this was a very honest biography talking about just the ministry. And just moving on to the ministry, one of the things last time we spoke, whenever we stopped recording, we had a small conversation basically in the background in which you were saying like, yeah, this book really shows the 5 solas. And then as soon as you said that, like it just had me really excited. Can you tell us a little bit about the main thought behind this book?
Yeah, so it's an outline that I hope that RC would have liked because he was so fond of the solos. But when I was researching, so let me back up just a little bit. When I began to work on this book, Steve Nichols' book on RC hadn't come out yet. I hadn't even read it yet. So how do you write a story on a life of a person you don't have any biographical information for? I was able to go down and get information when I was at Ligonier, which was great. But the primary thing that I drew from was RC's own writings. So I actually went through all of his books. He's got about 100 books in print. I went through all of those, and I just pulled out anecdotes, and I began to construct a timeline and really just talk about all these events as RC saw them. Conversations he had, situations where he had a discussion with somebody or fight with somebody. So I laid all that out on a timeline. And as I began to construct the basic contour of his life, I started to notice that there were key seasons. So like, for example, when his earliest battle really was in the 70s with the inerrancy battle. So that was kind of where he gets into it. So I'm like, well, he's really contending for sola scriptura. And then you look at the 90s and I saw, well, he's literally battling for sola fide, faith alone. And I just have this in my mind. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if he hit all of the solas in his life and ministry? And so I kind of began to look at the whole thing. And when you look at Sola Gratia, I mean, the 80s, he's writing about not just the holiness of God, but the follow-up book, the year that he published that, the year after that, he wrote Chosen by God. And that was probably the most controversial because people are coming at him and saying, well, wait a second now, I didn't realize that you believe this, So he really in the 80s had to contend for Sola Gratia. So, you start to build that and you're thinking, boy, is this really here? The last decade of his life was easy because Soli Deo Gloria, he was involved in so many different ministries, music and hymn writing and children's books and conferences and all kinds of stuff. All of his life, everything he did was for the glory of God. So that was an easy one. The one I struggled with was Solus Christus, because in that decade of his life, when they're planting St. Andrew's Church, there wasn't a specific controversy that he only fought in the 90s. But when you look at his entire life and ministry, he's contending for the Reformation and for Solus Christus his entire lifetime. So what I basically did was I just kind of took the body of his work and teaching on Solus Christus and I stuck it into that chapter. So I tried to follow it thematically, but there was definitely a pattern, and maybe I forced it, maybe it was too much, but I'd like to think that that RC, maybe it was intentional. Maybe he wanted to fight every battle according to the soul. I don't know, but it was fun, and I think it's a helpful way to think about his life and to think about the key thematic things that he was contending for. I know that my life doesn't line up with the solos, so when you find someone who does, you just run with it.
Well, I mean, if I may quote you, you say at the end, you're like not John MacArthur. R.C. Sproul had John Calvin's mind with Billy Graham's reach, and that's a big statement. That's a big statement. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about like exactly what you meant by that? Because I think because, you know, when we talk about Billy Graham, there's a lot of people who may agree to disagree or say this or say that. But one thing we cannot say is that he didn't have reach. He reached
Oh yeah.
millions of people.
Yeah, one estimate I read was that through the course of his lifetime, through his conference preaching and through television and radio, it's estimated that Billy Graham reached about 3 billion people in his lifetime. 3 billion people. Yeah, so that sentiment, I'm only chuckling because, you know, as a writer, you know, sometimes you work really, really hard on one sentence or one phrase. And I had fun with this project. So there was lots of times I'd be writing and I'd want to say something, and I would literally spend hours or even a whole day or sometimes even a whole week working through how to say something. If I could just quote the very beginning, the opening line is that R.C. Sproul was Martin Luther without the insanity. And I chuckled because I worked so hard on that because I wanted to formulate that the right way. But fans of RC will get that. It's not really a joke, but they'll get the reference immediately. But the other side of it, I was in an interview and I was talking to one of my subjects, and we were talking about the influence of RC. And that was something I had said, you know, originally I think I had said something like he had a John Owen mind with the Billy Graham reach, and really just trying to articulate kind of how that dichotomy works. I changed it to John Calvin because really, you know, RC was more of a Calvin in his mind. He didn't get as technical as Owen did. That's the whole point, is he wanted to be plain for people. But the sentiment is this, that usually when you have a person with a really large reach, like a Billy Graham, oftentimes what tends to happen, I don't think they ever mean to do this, but what tends to happen is that their teaching and their doctrine and their message gets brought way, way, way down. And with Billy Graham, I mean, he simply preached the gospel, which is enough, which is a great ministry. But really, he did not offer us much in terms of theological influence or theological formation. And even many people had a hard time with some of his theology, and he might have even been incorrect with some things that he was teaching. But the expanse was so wide. But yet, on the other side of it, usually when you have theologically robust and faithful and just exegetically deep thinkers and scholars, their reach doesn't normally go very far at all. It's usually only to the academy or to their church or whatever. So to find someone who can bridge the gap on both of those is pretty remarkable. And I was reading a stat, and I believe this is correct, and if I'm wrong, hopefully I'll be corrected, but I believe that Ligonier Ministries just last year reached 50 million people. 50 million people. So when you have sound doctrine and Reformed theology, he was teaching on philosophy, he was teaching, I mean, really thorny theological issues, but was able to not market that, but present that in a way that was understandable and palatable for millions of people. I don't think there's really been anybody else like that in a long time that has the theological acumen and the broad reach that RC had. He had both. So that was the reason for the statement. But when I was studying his life and his influence, I just kept on thinking, there's nobody like him, really. I mean, even you think about all the other ministries out there, there's nobody like RC. So it was pretty special. Yeah.
Yeah. It was as soon as I read that, I was like, you know, he's right. Especially at the beginning when you said about Martin Luther, I was like, hey, that's true. That's true. You know, a lot of the times people describe RC as this kind person, like this loving person, and there's just, for me, one of the biggest things is like, if you preach Christ and like your life doesn't show it, or your attitude or the way even that you carry yourself doesn't show it, like there's something miscommunicating, you know. And I think I spoke to you about this before, where I met this big name pastor, and at first I thought he was arrogant, and then I'm the one that was being arrogant, because I like, a lot of the times we need to understand that they have other stuff going on, and a lot of times it may not show, and we're so excited because we want them to be as excited to meet us as we are to meet them. And with R.C. Sproul, I never had the pleasure of meeting him. If anything, I only have a signed book that I bought online, because R.C. Sproul was one of those guys that I remember when he died, like I was on the couch, I was crying, just saying like, man, who's gonna teach me now? But I have learned so much from R.C. Sproul even after his death. And then like I appreciate books like this because they talk about the person and their ministry, and just shows really how he actually showed with his life what he preached. And we don't have to get into details of his life. And just thinking about when he got in that train accident, right? When he was in that train accident, and when they asked him, you know, like, why do you think like your life was spared? And he was just saying like, by the mercy of God. I mean, it really, a lot of the times, like you may think, like those are not the words that may come out of you know, just anybody, but just saying like, by the mercy of God, we're alive. This is why I love that you bring up that it says that he was a kind man saved by a kinder savior. And it's just like, that's just beautiful, because he really reflected the Christ that he served. And like, and talking about the five solas and just his ministry, like it's really impactful.
Yeah, so I never had the chance to meet RC either. You know, I know members of his family, and I've obviously spent time with some people that have ministered with him. You know, and they've all said the same thing. You know, they've all reflected the same thing, that, you know, certainly he had bad days, you know, and he did things wrong sometimes, and he had to apologize and repent. And, you know, those are all, again, human things that all of us do. But he really did. I mean, RC would really try. And if you notice too, I give $1 million to know how he would handle a lot of the stuff that's going on right now. I mean, he'd be just rolling right now because of so many theological errors that are just popularized today. But you know, he was able to argue and disagree with people. But he did do it with kindness. And one thing I think that's really important, and I'm saying a lot of things here, but one of the goals that I have of this book is to try to present RC as a model for how to fight fair, how to disagree and be fair. And another thing that RC was really careful about is that he always wanted to try to articulate the opposing position accurately. We don't do that very often, and we should, and shame on us if we don't. But the worst thing you can do would be to set up a straw man that's fake and then attack that straw man and then claim to win the argument. RC didn't do that. And RC would oftentimes correct misconceptions, even about Roman Catholicism. You know, there'd be a popular misconception that everybody accepted, and he would say, that's not correct. They don't actually believe that. And he would fight for that. He would actually defend their theology for them. And then after he had done that, to get to what the actual argument was, then he would go back and say, now let me tell you why that's wrong. And he would argue that way. So he was always, and he would get upset when people misrepresented other people's positions. It really bothered him because he cared about the truth. So we've lost that in our discourse, and we have to get it back, because the truth itself is enough for us, and the truth is the truth. And so we don't do God or anyone else any favors by spinning the truth and then fighting for what we claim is true against that supposed lie. It's better to argue for what you know the position is, and then refute that with truth. And that's what RC did. And he detested what he called studied ambiguity. So language that was sort of loose enough where anything could fit into the definition, he would say, no, be precise, say what you mean. And he would correct language and verbiage. And, you know, at the end of his arguments and his discussions and his sermons, he would very often, his wife Vesta went to pretty much everything with him, and she would listen. And so very often what he would do is when he would step down from the platform or from the pulpit and would sit down next to her, he would turn to her and he would ask, was I kind enough? He asked that all the time. Was I kind enough? Was I gentle enough? And he would be looking for her to tell him, like, was I okay? Now, I assume that there were probably some times when she would have said, well, RC, you could have done better on that, you know, but he really tried. I mean, he would be passionate about the truth, but he would lean in, you know, if you watch video, he would lean in real close and he'd be looking at people in the eyes, and he really cared that they got it. But he wasn't trying to offend for the sake of offense. He wanted the truth to be what was offensive, but they had to deal with the truth. So again, he just modeled for us how to do it. And that's one thing I think I want people to take away from the book is how do we articulate truth and how do we contend for truth, but do it the right way. And I think we're missing that today. We need to get back.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that I think a lot of people can agree with, I think most of the people would agree with this, is that he would take this heavy theological teachings or doctrines and then just articulate them in such a way where anyone could understand without the cost of its meaning. You know, and a lot of the times at least I can speak for myself. A lot of times I try to explain something, it's so hard to explain or to put it in such a way where they can understand me that I feel like I failed at doing that. Or I feel like sometimes, man, I explained this like in a way where I'm like really kind of getting out of what I meant to say. And you know, that reminds me when you talked about R.C. Sproul like leaning over to his wife and was like kind of, I always tell my wife, like every time like I'm done preaching, I'm like what did you think? How was it? Did I say anything wrong? And a lot of the times, you know, she'll tell me like if I can confess, last night I was preaching on Malachi chapter 2, and we're talking on marriage and divorce, and I asked her, I was like, how did you like it? How was it? Like, what did you think? You know, because like my first audience is God, you know, and then I care about what my wife says as well, because she'll tell me, she'll be honest. And she was like, I think you were probably just being a little too angry. And I'm like, oh man, like I hope the people don't think like I'm just like getting on them or anything like that. Like I do it out of love, you know, but I can definitely like maybe not in the same sense where like, oh, my kind was I kind enough, but like I can actually like kind of see like where the whole thing is at. Like I can see myself like being like, you know, next time you're like, was I less angry now, you know? But so it's such a beautiful thing, like to see such a man lived his life and then just care for the people that Christ cared for. And I think that's the whole thing of this book. Just talking about like the 5 solas. A lot of people will dismiss, you know, a lot of stuff just because it has 5 solas on it. But I think we can all benefit from the life of R.C. Sproul, whether you agree with him or not. Like he was just such a powerful in his teaching. Like you can learn so much from him, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's such a short book, like having like such a heavy like I have enough things to think about from this book, from such a short book, that it really like I can't wait to like apply it in my life and be like, you know what, I want my life to reflect these things. I want to fight for the truth. I want to live my life for God's glory. You know, for you know, I want to be of the same faith and the same spirit. And those things are just so encouraging. Now, brother, let me ask you something. How did it feel to get a forward from John MacArthur?
It was wonderful. He was very gracious to write that. And I mean, when I was thinking through, you know, who to ask, I mean, there's really nobody better alive today, I think, than John. I mean, certainly people in his own ministry, but I mean, they were good friends, and they cared about each other, and they were friends for 25 years. So I asked, and he said he was very busy. Obviously, he's got a lot going on, but he said, well, if you're okay with me writing a relatively short one, I'll do it. And I was like, yeah, you know, so no, he was very gracious, and I knew that Pastor John would have a lot to offer, and he did. You know, he talked about his relationship with RC, and he was very kind to the things he said about the book itself. And yeah, I was really, really happy to have that. And because, you know, John MacArthur is another one of my, I hate to say the word hero, but you know, heroes in the faith, people that you draw from. But RC and John are really, those are my two pillars. I mean, they've taught me the most. I've learned the most from both of those men. In terms of preaching, probably Steve Lawson as well. But so just to have both of those men kind of in front of you to learn from is a tremendous blessing. So Yeah, I was very excited when I heard back that he would do it, and I hope it helps, not just the credibility of the book. I mean, certainly that's why you have a forward on a book, is it just adds to the credibility of it. But more than that, I was really hoping that his forward would set the tone, and really, I think one of the biggest fears that I have as a writer, um, and being a relatively young writer too, is that I don't want to write something and then have people who know better come back and say that's not correct, or you didn't know that person, or you got that wrong, or I really want to be careful with how I present things. So I wanted to go to people who knew him and present the book, and if they had corrections or if they had things that they thought were wrong, I was trusting them to tell me. But to have someone who was a good friend of his to do a forward and to agree with it, it's just affirmation that this isn't about the book, but it's about presenting RC's life the right way. And that was one thing that Pastor John said, was something to the effect that he appreciated how this was told. He says that RC would have appreciated this. So that's enough. I mean, that's great, and RC's wife Vesta read the book, and she was helpful with that. She was able to correct a couple things that I was missing, and she would, that isn't exactly right, and she would say it's more like this. I'm like, great, so that's helpful, because I it's important to get these things right. So but it was as a writer, it's a joy. It's great.
Yeah, one of the things that I always like to ask is, like, once you have the book, how many times have you read the book?
How many times have I read it?
Yeah, besides writing it.
Like just to sit down and read it again?
Yeah.
I don't think I've picked it up since it's come out.
All right. Okay. The reason why I'm
No,
asking, because usually, you're like, oh man, I should have added this. I should have
Oh
said.
yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
No,
So
my brain's already on the next thing. I'm already working on. I have a list on my back wall of projects I'm working. I have three book projects that are in the queue, as they say. That's in the process, and I've got three more that I'm already writing on. So my brain is already next.
Okay.
So I did read back through it one time after I got my proof copy, and but I tried to not be critical, because you could always add more, you could always do more, but I'm happy with how it came out. I mean, it did what I wanted it to do, and I'm satisfied. So
Yeah, and I usually say, like, I usually ask the question, because I'm like, is there something that you will want to say that is not here? But it looks like you said everything that you wanted to say, so I'm not gonna continue. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, so the answer, there's a lot I wanted to say that I didn't say, and that was the challenge, is that I have notes and notes, pages and pages and pages of anecdotes and stories and phrases and quotes and things that I really wanted to put in, but then when you consider the scope of the book, you just can't do it. For a book like Dr. Nichols' book, he could include so much more. It's a 400-page book, and really more could be written. There were even stories that he tells in that book that when I read it, I'm thinking there's more to that story. He could have put more in there, but he chooses to write what he wants to write. So there will be more stories and more books in the future. And RC's son, RC Jr., wrote a book about his dad and included stories in there. And I didn't really draw as much from those, because a lot of those are personal stories. It wasn't as much about the ministry. So there's always more you can add in. And again, I mean, I don't really talk about any of his flaws, of any of the sins or the challenges, and and it's just not for me to do it. I'll let someone else who has the authority to write on those things. I'll let those people talk about that.
And it's not dishonest to just write about his public ministry. So
Sure.
It's because a lot of people is like, oh, I want an honest biography. Well, it's not dishonest to just write about his public ministry. The focus of this is to encourage people. It's to encourage people. And there will be more books that will definitely talk about those things, but this is not that book. This book will definitely encourage you. So if you know who R.C. Sproul is, or interested in knowing the fights that he got into, like, this is a book to get. This is a book that will tell you, like, the faithfulness of this man serving the Lord. So Nate, thank you so much for being with us again. Honestly, man, it's a pleasure. I know that you were busy. As you guys can see, I'm in a different setup today. because we had to meet in a different time this time. And I'm just so grateful that Pastor Nate was able to just accommodate me. And I truly appreciate it, Nate. Anything you want to say? Anything? Any last words?
There's always last words, but no, I just really hope that the book is encouraging, that it's instructive and helpful for people. And really, I hope that it acts as a gateway to get people to read RC's material. There are great books he's written, wonderful books that I love, truly that I love. And I just hope that people are able to grab onto that content, to go to Ligonier, get all their stuff, and really just learn from this man, because he really was a gift to the church. And you said it earlier, we are to pay honor to these people, not as, perfect. They're not perfect, but they are gifts from God to us to help us. And so I just wanted to pay honor to that man and to thank him and thank his ministry for all their work. So I hope it helps people, hope it encourages them. Yeah.
And start, I tell people to start when they tell me like, oh, what book do you recommend? The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. It is, it changed so many views that
Holiness of God, and his book called Faith Alone.
Faith Alone.
Faith Alone is a great book. I love that book. So I would say, those two books to start with that's a good place to start. Yeah,
they're amazing. Alrighty, brother. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Thank you, brother.